Okay, esteemed panelists, this is our situation. We had a number of people to say that they were going to participate in our webinar, and we have only 2 of those folk who are actually with us. So I think we might change the format a bit because the Zooms, we always record our live streams and the Zoom itself is recorded. So we might change the format a bit and just kind of have a roundtable discussion, with you all. If and as folk join, they'll be able to do more Q&A, but the discussion itself can be recorded and archived, okay? And folk can respond to it in the future. Everybody can receive a copy and all of that. Is that acceptable?
It's acceptable to me.
Okay.
That's James.
Okay.
Yes, that's acceptable.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
All right. All right. So we do have all but actually one of our panelists present. I think he might, Professor Duce, you might be able to reach out to.
I just did.
Oh, okay. And I think he will join us. He is our youth panelist. And Yusuf, you might tell us a little bit about, no, excuse me, let me not lose all form.
Yeah, yes.
All form, okay. So, all right, so recapping what our discussion is about and where we are, and since there's not a lot of folk, it can be quite brief. Not uninspired, I'll say, by the kind of vigor of the American descendants of slavery movement and rhetoric, and the accompanying critique from the Pan-African community, the accompanying criticism, I'll even say, rather than critique, and with concerns about, is this rhetoric divisive of the, of the Black community as a whole? Is this, where is this leading our political dialogue? Joko Collective organized a multi-part series to kind of develop a context around the question itself, the broader question of what is the role of micronationalism, when we say we are first members of our nation before we're members of a collective of nations, in our overall strategies, for Black empowerment. And so the discussion is inspired by, but not contained by, and neither carrying or attempting to neutralize the contentions, in this discussion, so that we can have a protracted, objective discussion about, how we're doing problem solving from our respective bases, from our respective points of view. So the common denominator, the commonality is problem solving for the issues of Black peoples, wherever they are. So the local and the global is covered in that.
Excuse me.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yusuf should be joining us shortly.
Great.
Okay.
Okay. So our conclusions are one of the main themes that we derived from our first session in February was this question of systems. Okay, the questions of, if, for instance, one of the main issues is, are immigrants from other parts of the Black world coming into the US in competition for resources that US national Blacks, Blacks born here, should have first access to, okay? So we looked at this issue in general, where all of these kinds of frustrations are happening globally with immigrant populations as people are migrating for all variety of reasons, through, tensions between resident populations and immigrant populations, leading catastrophically off, and too often to violence and that kind of ultimate kind of fallout. And so our conclusion was that before we can really understand the tensions at the surface and the complications at the surface, we got to look at the systems that produce the problems, okay? If the competition is over resources, what are the systems governing resource access, okay? If it's about access to institutions and being able to, establish infrastructures and whatnot, what are the systems that, govern those kinds of access? So our fundamental question this time is, do the systems work for us? And again, as you saw in your email prep, we're trying this time to capture our panelists' ideological perspectives, okay? Going through a series of questions that look at the systems, at hand. We decided on 3 kind of categories of systems: economic systems, political systems, cultural systems, all right? And so moving to the next slide. Okay, the pandemic. Since our last meet, clearly the public has been enwrapped in the, encroaching pandemic, okay? First encroaching and now fully present, and probably at the time that we were speaking, it was actually fully present. So this isn't a forum for discussion of that new coronavirus itself or its spread, because that deserves its own forum, but it is a forum to discuss. We don't want to get lost in any rabbit holes, but I think we're not going to have that problem since we don't have a lot of discussant participants. But it's absolutely a forum to discuss how our economic, political, and cultural systems that we currently rely on are responding to the crisis. So we're going to fold in some questions, that take us into how the pandemic is affecting and stressing those systems, how those systems are able to mitigate or not and support effectively. By no means an exhaustive set, of ideas, but so that we are able to give the pandemic its proper due as an absolute force of nature. Next slide, please. Okay, so our video is optional. If we keep our mics muted, then we can keep that ambient noise down and hear what's going on in our foreground, not in our background. If we had participants, and I think actually we have 2. So participants, if you send any questions or comments you have in the chat, which our co-host who's monitoring our screen is going to open up in a minute. We'll take those questions and comments at the end segment of each discussion of each question, topical question. If it's general question, then please put GEN so we know it's a general question and state your question. If it is a question for a specific panelist, put the panelist's name, okay, or the name on their image if you aren't recalling their name necessarily, and we know that the question is for them. If you refine your question so that it's only 2 or 3 sentences long, then it'll only take about a minute to ask it, and then we can answer it, okay, and accommodate. But of course, since we're a lot smaller than we anticipated being, than our RSVPs would indicate, we probably aren't going to have a lot of problem with being able to go deep into folks' questions. Next slide. Okay. As we're discussing, again, since we're so small, we have a lot more latitude for time and discussion. So we can go longer than 2 minutes when we're making our statements or giving responses. For the benefit of folk who will watch or who may join later. Also, we want to clarify and confirm when we are responding to an assertion, some assertion that our colleague has made, that we take a minute to clarify what the colleague has intended to say. Make sure we got it, okay? You know, if I understand you correctly, is the general adage. And if we confirm that, and then within that say, okay, I would like to respond to, specifically identify what it is you want to respond to. It helps for folk because, you know, we're also an educational outfit, and it will help folk follow a complex conversation and a rich conversation with folk who have, you know, varying amounts of background. And it also just helps the clarity and continuity of the conversation. Okay, keeping that in mind. Next slide. Okay. So our panelists who are going to actually introduce themselves and talk about their background are Dindi Katanga, Dr. Gerald Higginbotham, Yusuf Desai, Yusuf Brooks, and James Simmons. So after you introduce yourselves, and I'll unmute all of you, you don't have to do that. I'll unmute all of you so you can introduce yourselves. And as part of your introduction, take a minute to answer the question, not literally a minute, you can have more time than that, but in your view, what are the economic, political, and cultural features, one or all, or whatever you want to respond to within that, of systems that tend to create social stability? And the converse, what produces instability? Okay, let me unmute. Oh, okay, why am I not, it's not letting me unmute. There we go. Let us unmute.
Great.
Okay, Dr. Higginbotham is not muted. And James, is this you? Oh, that's actually, okay, there's James.
Oh, okay. I am unmuted, and I
Right.
can unmute myself if you just let me know.
Okay. Let me go here. All right, is everybody unmuted?
Yes.
Good. All right. Excellent. So why don't we start with Dindi?
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me quite well. Thank you for inviting me for this. Very excited to get the call back from Joko Collective. I think this particular moment is very exciting in the sense that in the past couple of weeks, we can see systems around us crumbling. And so it's important to have these conversations, and certainly conversations about how can we rebuild or create new things from this crisis, and also how we can take care of each other. So I think this conversation is really relevant to that. My name is Dindi Katanga. I'm an educator. I'm the co-founder of a small radical school called Angelus Workshop School. We're over in Palms, California, and we're grades 6 through 12. And we're particularly interested in democratic education for young people, as well as finding ways to build class consciousness and kind of community activism for young people. And then part of what I also do is I teach in a university setting where I work with teacher educators. And there I also teach classes, you know, kind of to do with the Black radical tradition, as well as democratic education and critical theory. So that's some of my background. So when it comes to the systems that serve Black folks and those that don't, I'll start with the economic, and I'll start with what I think, when I think of what the Black radical tradition is, or what it means for there to be Black liberation, that task has to happen outside of the capitalist mode of production. So part of my ideological orientation is to be an anti-capitalist. And the reason here in particular is probably twofold. For one, workers, and that it usually means, has traditionally mean people who are marginalized, and especially Black folks, never are part of the people who own those means of production. And so this is a particular system that requires you to sell your labor to another, and in a coercive way, not in a mutual sharing or non-hierarchical way. And it's a system that cannot exist outside of the slavery, outside of systems of domination. It's a system that can't operate outside of that. And in fact, could not have existed but without that primitive accumulation that came out of colonizing folks, enslaving folks, and like I said, again, coercively taking their labor. And while we're not living in the same kind of slave society, we're still part of systems where you know, the idea of choice when it comes to selling your labor is quite iffy to me. The other thing about capitalism that makes me anti-capitalism is because it's a mode of production that's not very old, and the contradiction that lie within it can't hold. So it has to be propped up. It has to look for the next place to loot and plunder. It requires natural resources that are diminishing. It requires exploiting people. It requires governments to regulate it. And it requires all of these things that we don't need. And before this, of course, we've had feudalism and we've had other systems, you know, certainly as Africans, having more communal living systems that seem to be more sustainable. And so even as a mode of production, I think that we should consider something else. When it comes to the political aspects of this, I'm really interested in what I would consider a Black internationalism. And that doesn't mean that we ignore the particulars of race or colorism or nationality or language, that those politics that are different in different contexts. So I'm from the nation state of Kenya, and there are particular struggles and things going on there that don't match, you know, being African American, or being from the Caribbean, or being in, you know, living in the diaspora and living in France. So my internationalism doesn't ignore those particular issues, but I think that there is a particular universal anti-Blackness that needs to be addressed. And also that this capitalist mode of production required a particular African enslaved person, African exploited person to operate. And for that reason, anti-Blackness is universal. It doesn't seem to not exist anywhere in the world. And so for that reason, if we're to upend racism and capitalism and other systems of domination, I think a Black internationalism should be part of our politics. And then finally, when it comes to that cultural aspect, I'm very interested in Black consciousness movements, Pan-Africanness, even expressions such as negritude. And my interests there are kind of twofold. So I'm interested in the same way Fanon was interested in Black folks everywhere, overcoming the internal colonization that comes with centuries of being dominated in this way, and kind of reclaiming history, finding pride, finding collective solidarity so that we can move together, and also creating myth and folklore to connect past to future to present. The other reason I think this Black solidarity needs to be international in the way that I talk about is that anti-colonial struggle, without that international domination, that international dimension, we've seen that the way the capitalist mode of production works is really sneaky. So it doesn't seem that we can have liberation for one without liberation for all. And that, I think that's part of the reason of holding on to this, what I'm calling a Black collective kind of cultural understanding. And I'm not saying that those expressions all have to look alike or that they need to be the same, but I am saying that there is value in that. And I think that was more than my 5 minutes. So thank you.
That's okay. We've got some time to kind of settle in. Thank you so much. Okay, moving ahead, and I'm not going in any particular order. There's no particular order here. Something that I failed to state that I stated in our first session, specifically to the young person who is, or the gentleman who was representing the African descendants of slaves Los Angeles chapter position, and Dr. Higginbotham, you'll give your own background and explain the descendants of slaves movement and African Slaves Incorporated. But because we are fundamentally a Pan-African shop, either, you know, with varying degrees of either with sentiment or with a whole lot of background, yeah, we want to wait so we can kind of balance the conversation a bit, wait discussion to you, okay? So if you are having, you know, kind of need to rebut, or either something that you want to insert as the discussion develops, you know, let us know, and we'll, you know, do that, because you're kind of here alone in a sense, you know what I'm saying? You're representing a particular view, but this could all be presumption on my part, okay?
And really it is. I'm not alone.
Okay, very good. No.
I got God on my side. The Spirit. Okay. He said, when you got the Spirit and the Father and Holy Spirit, hey, you're never alone.
Okay.
I'm so excited about meeting this group here. This
good.
Is awesome.
I'm glad. And so that being said, Dr. Higginbotham, would you please introduce yourself, your organization, and give a sense of your ideological background and how you would respond to this question about social stability?
Real simply,
any or all of those features. Go ahead, yes.
I'm not a long-winded person. I'm right to the point. My name is Dr. Gerald Higginbotham. I serve as the Prime Minister for the American Slave Nation. I represent the 21 million descendants of slaves here in the United States. I'm a commercial airline captain for American Airlines, so I'm living the dream, but I'm a full-time minister for the American Slave Nation. Everything that what you have said, this whole piece here, everything affects each other. It's all part of a system. 4 things I'm just going to mention. Number 1, what we're doing on our end, we're focused on the identity. I'm a descendant of American slaves, not African, but American slaves. I was born here in Los Angeles. Folks was born over in Louisiana and Georgia, so they were descendants of slaves. So the identity piece is clear on this side. The second thing we're focusing on is business here in America. America is about one thing, business. The third thing we're focused on is the third way. We've shifted from an industrial-based society to the information age, so it's a different paradigm that we're in. It's a whole new different ballgame. And so we have helped to set up the new model for the new system. And the American Slave Nation wants to introduce, or will introduce, the new third wave system. And we focus on leadership, because everything rises and falls on leadership. So we're organizing across the country, getting folks to do some things to come together around a mission, a vision, and a cause to help the American slave culture, not African American, because that's an immigrant, the American slave culture. So that's kind of like our focus, and we're laser focused, razor sharp focus to help move and heal that culture that's been locked into the lowest level of a real life monopoly game here in America.
Ashe, thank you. Thank you. Well articulated. Have you responded to the question about what creates social stability, or was the question of the response about business your response to that question?
Yeah, to that question, everything is related. Everything is tied together.
Okay.
The issue has been simple. We have not owned any. It's been leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And our group here weren't taught about business. We were, in our culture here, we were sold in that arena.
Okay.
We were sold in that arena, so our folks didn't teach us about, they wanted to keep us away from that process because slavery was a bad thing here in this country. So it's all tied together, but you have to find the common denominator, which what we have done, and have developed a systematic ABC process to address the cause so we can bring about the change for us that we need to get us off the bottom. It's about leadership now.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Let's see. Professor Doucet, would you like to go next, and then we'll ask?
Sure, yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Professor W. Youssef Doucet in the English department at Santa Monica College. I'm a poet, a PhD student at Claremont Graduate University in the Cultural Studies program. And my research interest is the Black body, the African, in the symbolic order of the modern era, very much in line with Dindy was talking about in terms of the deep anti-Blackness that we see in the world, and that has been structured into the various institutions of the modern world. I want to agree with Dr. Higginbotham. The economic, the political, and the cultural, that, the separation of spheres is a useful illusion. They're all completely intertwined with each other and informing each other. Hence, the teaching of political economy instead of economics separate from politics, as we do here in the States, right? Economics and political science rather than political economy. And culture is already there, right? Culture is already implied in the base. If I can use a Marxist structural, image with economics being the base. Economics is something that occurs between people, and as soon as people come together, it becomes a meaningful interaction, and meaning is exactly the realm of culture. So culture is already implied in the base before you even get to the level of structure and superstructure. There's a dynamism among the three. I've spent my entire adult life as a cultural worker, a writer, a teacher, a caregiver of sorts. I decided early on that if I had to earn a living, I had to earn a living in a way that I could enjoy, and I enjoy working with people. And I knew from second grade that I was going to be a teacher. So I'm living my dream very much. And in terms of what systems, I think that Dindy really laid out the issue quite well and thoroughly. There really is only one global system, that is the global capitalist system. It has morphed over the centuries, but it remains the system in place. And it's a system. Stability is an interesting idea. Sometimes stability is status quo, right? And things are stable if things are going according to plan. Chairman Omali Yeshitela of the African People's Socialist Party calls it, the peace of the plantation. It's peaceful for the plantation owner, but it's instability for everybody else, right? Slavery is instability, colonialism is instability, neocolonialism is instability. So maybe a better idea is, what is a more sustainable form, political, economic, cultural form. And I think studies have shown, psychological studies have shown, that we as human beings work best, most optimally at the village level. Is the village level possible anymore in a mass society like modern society? Why shouldn't it be, though? We should be able to make those types of choices. Again, Dindy referenced, the communal past of Africa, the communal past of societies all over the world that really start as village societies. And we can society can be reorganized, and the pandemic is probably offering an opportunity for that as systems crumble and people, as it lays bare the inadequacy of the system to really care for the most of us. And that would be my answer to the second part of the question, or the second question. Systems that care for the most of us. Those are the systems that will produce stability. Systems that care for the few and that are structured to care for the few are the systems that create the instability that on any given day the average human being in the world faces. And certainly we here as a national group, those African descended people, called African Americans, called Black Americans, called American descendants of slavery, etc. We experience those the way other Black folks in the world, the way other natives in the world experience those, on the bottom of things. So my great inspiration continues to be Malcolm X, and my great inspiration continues to be Frantz Fanon. Nothing they said has failed to be accurate still. I think we can use the systems as they are to push their limits, demonstrate their limits, and find a new way to do things. The system is beyond reform. We need to find a way to do things in a new way. And looking back at the way we used to do things, the systems that were stable, were sustainable before the emergence of rapacious capitalism. And of course, that's a redundancy because capitalism is only rapacious. Let's look back to look forward. A lot of people are anti-capitalist, but I recognize that many people who describe themselves as anti-capitalists are not yet ready to say they are, or maybe will never say they are socialist or communist. I mean, I think because of the, the history, the experience of real world communism, socialism, disillusionment with that. But I want to echo the Hungarian psychoanalyst and political theorist, philosopher, Slavoj Žižek. Again, this pandemic may offer us an opportunity to really let a global communism with a small c emerge. I think that'll do for now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, can we go to our youth panelists, Brother Yusuf Brooks, and then we'll end with Professor Attorney James Simmons. Okay. I think there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Yusuf Brooks. I'm the former president of the Pan-African Student Union at Santa Monica College. Currently, I'm studying political science, and I'm in the midst of transferring right now. And so what I would say to the first part of the question, I do agree with what the previous panelists have said, in that all these systems are related. I mean, all these different spheres are highly related, and they each have, looking at each one of them, they each bring features that rise up that bring up certain ideas that we can think about that might change the way we see we're dealing with this pandemic. What I mean by that is the economic systems that will create that tend to create stability. If we're thinking of stability for all people, are systems that allow a certain material reality for everyone, So everybody is getting something out of it, substantial enough to keep them going. Although, like, we can also look at the way this system is, where there's stability for a very, very small and very powerful rich minority, where there is instability, chaos, and struggle for the masses. And oftentimes, and almost in all the times in the United States, those masses are going to include Black people, because Black people deal with the brunt of American capitalism, of American racism, and Black people around the world deal with the brunt of capitalism globally. So I feel like as a global political economic system, capitalism, it exports all these diseases and problems that we are now ready to face, that we are now needing to face. And part of the reason, like, why this pandemic even spread was because of a capitalist approach to solving problems that emerged in China, which was a reversal from their previous way of doing things. So I would argue that the answer is part of both questions. But in order to look at the instability that we are facing and the stability that we could face in the future, I think we also need to look at like one of the most powerful structures is racism, and how racism can go, and how racism exists here in the United States. It exists in the Caribbean, all throughout Latin America, through Africa, and it all has heavy anti-Black tendencies. So I definitely agree with several of the panelists who have said that, and that should be our focus, and that we draw much more power, returning to the core of where Black people come from, which is Africa. And we draw power from each other by working together to fight these systems together, because the capitalist oppression that oppresses us here in the United States is highly related to the same system and the same banks that are run from France and Britain that went and exploited Africa and went and took their natural resources. And the banks store their money in Wall Street here in the United States. So these people are working together while simultaneously fighting against each other. And I think that we can draw our power from working together to upend that system and to work for a system that's much more communal, that is based on the needs of the many, that is based on mass mobilization of people in times of panic, like we would need right now. We would need a mass mobilization. We had several months to prepare for the pandemic. Nothing was done because businesses and their interests were getting and interfering in the process of health officials. And I think I would just like to add that my background is primarily Black nationalism, Pan-Africanism, and socialism. I think that concludes what I have to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Yusuf. James, please introduce yourself and give us your repartee.
Okay, yeah, my name is James Simmons. I'm a practicing attorney in the Los Angeles area. People ask what kind of law do I practice? I practice criminal law and civil litigation. Excuse me. But I think all what I practice falls within what is commonly called civil rights law, what I call human rights law. I have been an advocate and an activist in the creation of all systems, or an attempt to create systems, alternative systems to that which are presently in place, which oftentimes ill serve the Black community. So when if something arises that needs to be taken care of, we don't necessarily wait for those who have the authority within this society to take action. The things that tend to create social stability in the United States and in California, Los Angeles, and other places around the country, this country, the United States of America, tend to be those things that repress advancement, progress for Black people as a whole, both here and around the world. So it's almost what creates social stability, and that's a very broad subject. We talk about stability in the community in terms of the church being a bedrock in the community, and all the good and bad that entails. We have a certain social structure in general in society that creates a certain stability where culturally, economically, politically, there is very little movement, slow movement, again, in terms of this trying to create conditions and activity that will generate change for the good. So when we talk about these things in terms of culture, politics, and economics, things are interconnected, but at times they are disconnected from one another. Black people have always had a certain amount of independence in terms of politics, a certain amount of dependence and independence. Black people have had a certain amount of economic independence, while for the most part they have been dependent in terms of this system of capitalism. One of my students, I teach American political institutions amongst other subjects at California State University in Northridge, and one of my students asked, well, is capitalism intrinsically racist? And my reply was no. Capitalism is not intrinsically racist, because you have nations that are homogeneous in terms of race. Probably the majority of races, the majority of nations around the world, up until after the end of colonialism, the colonial epoch of European colonialism, were homogeneous. So there was not a racial dynamic within that nation. However, in the United States of America, Black people were property. Black people were wealth to whites. Black people were a commodity. So in this country, racism, I believe, is an intrinsic part of capitalism. It always has been, and up to this date, I believe it is, and foreseeable future, it will be. In terms of features of systems that produce instability, again, that's the flip side of the question. For every positive, there's a negative, and all the things in terms of the economic, political, and cultural features of the systems that everyone has spoke about produce instability. Talking about this response to the COVID-19, it is not surprising, but very infuriating when the response to this COVID-19 is basically, let's ignore it, it'll go away. After a few days, we have 15 cases, and then we'll have 0. We wait a week, and the warm weather will make it disappear. And at the same time, not testing people. And they say, don't wear a mask because it's not going to protect you. But if you have a mask, it's to keep from infecting other people. And in any case, we don't know who's infected, and we don't have any masks to put on anyway.
God.
So this, the response to this has been, okay, we want to buy American first, and we want America to produce it. And meanwhile, there's thousands of tests waiting to be completed. But the profit motive of nationalist capitalism in the United States is going to allow people to remain untested until American industry gets to the point where it can produce tests sufficient. And at this point, LA County is like, forget tests. We're beyond trying to control it, and don't even test people if it's not going to make a difference in their treatment. Just treat them. We don't need the test. And you don't have the test anyway, but it's based on a nationalist, American capitalism, profit motive, where we would rather have people die and remain untested. We would rather have people not wear masks. Telling people not to wear masks was one of the most bizarre things. But again, we didn't have masks anyway. So the features of the systems that produce instability are the same features that produce stability. And I guess that's all I have to say for now. I'm looking forward to this discussion, and I apologize. The internet that I am relying on has drops in and out, and but hopefully it won't be so disruptive that it will disrupt this meeting.
No, it was fine. It was fine. It was clear throughout, and throughout that, it's sustained. So I think all is well. Okay, just also so that we note as we go through our questions one by one, so much of what has been said is just going to overlap and just kind of be repeated in specific ways, in general ways, what have you. Because apparently, it's a pretty concise discussion, once the notion, as Professor Doucet said, that capitalist is the global system. There is no other global system to speak of. Then we know we're speaking in that realm and debating in that realm. So going on to our next slide and looking at our economy question, that is actually our frame. Looking at the legacy of capitalism, which has dominated the global economy since the 1500s, since the 16th century, establishing the wealth base of Western nations through the mechanisms of enslavement and colonialism and dispossession, a system in which the labor and capacities of many is exploited to support the luxury and capacities of a few. The few control the means of production, decide what's produced, control the distribution and valuing of products, and control the distribution of the wealth that's generated. Some say it's fundamentally beneficial, and yeah, there are social ills, but the system eventually is gonna work that out. Others say it's a fundamentally detrimental system that's inevitably and perpetually gonna produce social ills. But something that's not in dispute is that the ills are there. So as we go to our next screen, we can just go deeper into this question of how capitalism has specifically, we can get just a little bit more detailed, cite some places, cite some names, cite some historical circumstances. Served or disserved African descendant people locally and globally. How have they been served or disserved by other systems? Because capitalism doesn't stand alone, but even though it is dominant. We have some bubbles under here, our little kind of word wall of concepts that can be referred to or picked up. Anyone who is participating and sees a topic that they would like a panelist to expand on, more, by all means, integrate something from that word wall, but it's just a scheme, by no means exhaustive. It kind of lets us see some of the, related concepts, some of the scope of the concepts. And of course, with the COVID-19, as we fold the COVID-19 issue in, some of the things that we're seeing, that speaks directly to the capitalist order is profiteering, right? Someone can pick up that example, if they care to. We see profiteering. We already see the problems with the access to healthcare. That's fundamental. We see the present and exacerbated joblessness beyond job insecurity, employment insecurity, subsistence insecurity, just further exacerbated. Looking at the condition of houselessness, certainly in LA County, so many of our houseless are African descended people, American slave descendant, and and immigrant. So we've got this impact issue. Okay, so we want to go into this a bit deeper. What has been the direct disservice and or service of capitalism? Dr. Higginbotham, can you start that discussion, that response?
Thank you so much for allowing me to be able to be a part of this again. The picture that you put up there that I'm looking at, this is how God set up the system. It has been a leadership issue. I'm gonna harp on that piece because everything rises and falls on leadership. It has been man's disobedience as it relates to connecting to him. Everything's supposed to be the way it is at this moment, seed, time, and harvest. However, we've been off course, and I know as a commercial airline captain, a 10th of a degree off course, you're not gonna arrive at your destination. We've had the wrong information, and we have not dealt with the internal issues. Just like our country right now, we have a moral issue here in the United States of America. Anytime you lack morality, a nation that's not governed by morality is a nation that's in abyss. But it comes back to individualism. It's about making the right decision, good and evil, righteousness, unrighteousness. This is nothing but a system. And as you were talking here, all this here, there's one common denominator running through every piece of this. And until you address the common denominator, it's not going to go away. It's back to leadership. It's back to the heart issue. I'm going to hit that again. Everything rises and falls on leadership. Moral integrity. Economic, we can fix this. We have shifted from an industrial-based society to a new knowledge-based economy. And what you have just witnessed here this last week, you just saw the information age really take over. And America, forget that, the world is unprepared for this new information system. It's a whole new different ballgame. And so you can't use the old strategies in a new knowledge-based economy. It didn't work. There's been 3 waves: the agriculture age, industrial age, and information age. They are systems, economic system. Each one of them had their own social, political, and economic system. And we have been failure to learn about this new system. And that's what the American slave nation. There's a piece that I need to correct you on though, because we got to get back to the identity. I'm not an American descendants of slavery. I'm a descendant of American slaves. America bred slaves in this country here on those 7 southern plantations. I'm in Texas right at this moment. They bred them here. They created a whole new culture. And what I'm hearing everybody talking about is the global thing, but nobody want to talk about the American slave culture that was bred in this country. The last culture that has been introduced to God's human family. And God said that the last shall be first, not might, not maybe, but shall be. So we have to address the American slave piece in this nation. I was birthed here in America. I'm not an African American. They're two total different cultures. And I have to be so clear because I hear you say ADOS. ADOS, I don't know about that group. I can only tell you about the American slave culture. I'm a descendant of American slaves. And that's the piece that most people have missed. America has been a deadbeat parent to her firstborn and to her descendants. She bred slaves in this country to build this great nation that we're living in. This is about birthrights, the American slaves' birthright. She's had no other child but the slaves. And so that's my laser focus, is helping that culture. Before I go clean up anyone else's backyard, you got to clean up your own backyard first. And so we're laser focused on this end, dealing with the identity piece and the business piece. And now that we have shifted to the new knowledge-based economy, that process, that model is in place quietly as we organize. We're organizing to put it in place so we can see an evolution from the bottom up. We got to move the people from poverty, ignorance, dependency, and complacency to knowledge, wealth, and power, interdependency. So it's a new system. And that's why I came on today to talk to you about, hey, this is a new system that we have to focus on. Here's the new educational piece. Here's the new social, political, and what it looks like. That piece is done now. We've been working on this thing for the last 30 years. Me personally, I've been on a mission since the night Dr. King was assassinated, when our community burned down in Watts. 52 years. It'll be 52 years on April the 1st, April the 4th. And so I made a commitment that we're going to fix this thing when we get older. And I've been laser and razor sharp focused. And we have the piece in place. We're out of time doing the wrong thing. I'm not interested in focusing on the second wave system. I'm only interested in focusing on the third wave and bringing us over, across, help the people come across the bridge now here. All our institutions are designed to do just that. I'm fired up about this piece because you know what? We've been off course. It's been a leadership problem. We've been trying to get the folks to go backward. That's what number 45 has been trying to do. Keep the folks in this old industrial age system. And that system is dead. You just saw what happened here this week here. He just signed over $58 billion to a service industry business. That's part of the new system, the information age. It's a family, we got to wake up. It's a new day. It's a new breeze blowing. We're going to have to learn, unlearn, and relearn quickly because we're out of time doing the wrong thing. And please hear my heart. I love each and every one of you. But my assignment, just like I moved that jet today from St. Louis to Dallas, is to get the people to their new destination. And I'm laser focused on doing just that. And the team and everybody that's part of what we're doing on this side, we're about the information age. But before we put the information age in place, we had to fix the foundation. Slavery was the foundation of America. It was the economic engine. It was the cornerstone to the American society. And it has had a crack in its foundation. That's what's been happening. The rich has been getting richer and the poor has been getting poorer. So we had to address and fix the crack. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 5 years. But now we have to go ahead and move forward quickly because the new system has taken over. And if you're not focused on the new system, you're going to get left behind. You're going to fall in the abyss.
And may I ask, just because you've referred several times to the new system, the third wave system, if as we're going along and developing the conversation, you might be able to be more specific about what that system is in comparison to these systems that we're talking about. For instance, if we name capitalism and discuss its dynamics, which isn't really a matter of dispute, can you discuss this system and this system of solutions, name it, and describe how those dynamics work on economic levels and then political levels and cultural levels, what have you. Excuse me just a second, as the conversations develop, because we definitely want to keep the conversation in motion. So we can't really totally focus on what, you know, an explanation of the system. But if you can, you know, explain how the system you're talking about addresses the conundrum that, you know, that we're discussing, that can help us see what it is you're talking about.
I'm gonna get back to, ma'am, leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership. The government is not working for us. That's the reason why I launched the American Slave Nation. It's in place for people that want to come across to the new system. They want to learn about the new system, but it requires new leadership. Knowledge is now the primary source of capital. It's more important than money. It's intangible, it's inexhaustive, and it's how wealth is going to be created in this new system. It's a whole new social system, a whole new political system, whole new economics. Now I heard somebody talk about the new organization. Yes, we have to create the new organizations for the new system. We have some ideas what that look like. However, I can recommend a couple books for you because my time is short tonight because I'm flying first thing in the morning and I got to get some rest. I can recommend The Third Wave by Alvin Toffler. I recommend Creating a New Civilization by Alvin Toffler. I'm recommending Revolutionary Wealth. I've sat under Alvin Toffler as a student, and I helped to create that new model that he had talked about, or my colleagues and I.
Okay.
So that's the best thing I can do for you right now. It's back to leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership, new leadership for this new system. And I love to come back on your show again at some future date, but my time is up.
Oh, so you actually have to leave us?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That, unfortunately. Well, we certainly will be back in touch, okay? And, you know, we'll invite you again, but just so I can make sure I recap and have your takeaways so that we might, to the extent that we can in your absence, discuss some concepts. You're basically saying that the capitalist system itself is appropriate. What is, that the system is value free. It's the leadership within the system and the lack of moral mettle, the lack of morality within that leadership that has perverted the overall system. Is that the fundamental, would that be your fundamental comment about capitalism?
Yes, and the second thing I want to help you with, 2 other books. I want you to get, Mr. Norris wrote a book called America Little Black Book. I want to encourage everyone to go out and get that book out at www.slaves-usa.com. And the second book he wrote, The Renaissance Plan, because those are the tools that we are using right now to begin to help bring our people over to the new system. And
okay.
You are right on point.
Okay,
your assessment of that.
Yeah, well, I think that you were very clear in, you know, I think you were very clear in what you're articulating. And so, again, I guess, you know, I think you're leaving it up to us to find out what this system is and what this third wave, because the systems we're talking about have names and, you know, have specific dynamics, but not to say that the third wave doesn't, it's just that it hasn't quite been named in this conversation, which is not a problem. What I'm doing now is you're making your exit, is kind of gaining clarity about what you've presented today. That's my goal. Okay.
And here's the other piece.
Okay.
I'm never leaving you. Never will leave you. I'm always here when you're ready to come on and talk. I'm here for you. But I have to put the new system in place because we're getting further and further behind. Dr. King has been dead 52 years on the 4th of April, and we're still doing the same old thing. The definition of insanity is doing the same old thing, expecting a different outcome. We have to change, and we have to do it now. I'd like to continue the conversation with you down the road here, but I'm here for you. You've got my number and my email address.
Much appreciated, Dr. Higginbotham. Thank you for your devotion to the system that you see will uplift and solve problems for Black people. and your sincerity in that. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.
All right, peace and blessings to everyone. Love you. Love meeting everybody. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. So with Dr. Higginbotham's exit, of course, we lose a kind of dynamic, but the conversation will continue and be recorded and be of great use. And so, responding to this fundamental concept, Dr. Higginbotham affirmed that his point is that capitalism as a system isn't a problem, it's value free, but it's the leadership that is the problem. Would you care to respond, James?
Yeah, I think capitalism is not value free. It places a value on, and neither is so-called democracy in this country. But each of them have a value, which are that have values that are constantly reinforced. The value of the weak over the strong, the value of those who have exercised both economic and political and social power over those who do not. I don't know if such a system is, and I wish Dr. Higginbotham were here. I'm not quite sure that if God, or what kind of God would create such a system if it has led to so much misery and murder and genocide, exploitation, and this uneven development of peoples and nations and continents. I don't know if that would be that would be accurate. But no, I think that there are plenty of values, and most of them to our detriment, to the detriment of Black people around the globe. The underdevelopment of Africa. One of the things that in our discussions of Black Panther is like, well, Wakanda is almost like a representation of colonial-free Africa. What Africa could have been, minus the fantasy mineral. But the development of African nations, of Asia and South America, the current situation in Africa where rulers are bent on the profit motive. You become a ruler so you can profit. Miners, peasants, workers are exploited on such a fantastic level based on the values of capitalism. So I'm not sure I'm pretty sure that capitalism has values, but they're just not, those again, they create stability for those who control the capital and great instability. This is why you have 50 years of conflict in Congo, 50 years of, or 60 years. Is it 60 years? 60 years at this point. Almost 60 years, 55 years of conflict in Congo. So traditions are lost. The people have been unstable, even if they were politically liberated from Belgium. You still have these former colonial controllers destabilizing the life and the progress of the political, social, and economic development of Congo, and not just Congo, but over Africa. But Congo is probably the most pointed example. It was King Leopold killed millions in the 19th century, and these folks, France, the United States, and others who conspired to kill Patrice Lumumba and control the resources of Congo and Angola and every other place, destabilized this society. And this chart is, making sure that we understand what this chart stands for. That's the screen. I think if we could put some lines and some arrows, and it would pretty much describe what has been happening over the last few centuries, at least.
Okay, building on that, Yusuf Brooks, you just put food in your mouth. Okay, Professor Doucet, would you want to respond to this notion, the notion that Dr. Higginbotham has asserted, that it's not capitalism. Capitalism, the system is value-free. It's the leadership at the center that is amoral, that is producing all the problem, the social instability, the degradation, all of that. Unmute. Okay. Oops.
Oh, you muted me back. All right, I'm unmuted.
Okay, that's right.
All right.
There you go.
Well, I think Dr. Higginbotham, once he said that, and he said it pretty early, that, more or less capitalism is God's plan. I don't know what else. How does one respond to that? I mean, you can't really, you can respond, but, he's making a theological point. Rather than a product of history, right, and historical, dynamics, historical forces. I'm going to echo James. I mean, I think the chart really does lay it out, and there's all, that's the dialectic that has been the dialectic of capitalism and development, the development of Europe, the development of Europe's extensions in the Americas, in Africa, in Australia, etc. Their development has required everyone else's underdevelopment, everyone else's looting, literal looting of societies. And those are indeed the values of capitalism. It was really curious to me to hear Dr. Higginbotham make that theological claim. I mean, that's in keeping with what has been part of the rationalizations coming from Europe and European descendant folks, that this is a product of the predestination, right? I mean, folds in well with the Protestant work ethic and their riches and their ability to enrich themselves at the expense of others, including the white or the European peasantry, the closing of the commons in Europe, is a sign of their divine favor. So that's just, more of that, and that seems like another version of manifest destiny and the white man's burden, etc. And I was, I think that for Dr. Higginbotham, he did name the new system. It's the knowledge system, and a knowledge system that I believe accepts the logic of capitalism. I mean, in terms of, knowledge industries and the technology required, that still requires extractive industries. That still requires, children, digging coltan with their hands in the mines in in the Congo, and various other. I mean, the devices still require plastic and wiring. So those extractive industries don't disappear because the knowledge economy or the tech economy is at the forefront of the capitalist mode of production, capitalist acquisition of resources. So yeah, it is not value free, right? It is not a value, a moral in its practice, right? In its real impact on the world. And again, beyond, though not really beyond, the bodies that have piled up, right, over the centuries because of the various forms, the various manifestations of capitalist accumulation of power and profit. The very planetary system is at stake because of capitalist mode of production. And I have complete confidence in the planet itself to correct itself, but at the expense of life as we know it, in order to make that correction. So it reveals itself as unsustainable. This unsustainable mode of production that requires and continues to require the enslavement of people. Again, it may not be chattel slavery anymore, but you enslave entire nations, controlling their economies, and of course, the various coercive apparati of the state, right? The police are still in place, the armies are still in place. We still fill up the jails. We still fill up the foster care systems. And again, in a global aspect, we still are shot down in the street by police and private citizens. Let me take the focus off, African descent folks for a moment and just remind us of just what recently happened in Bolivia with the coup. And the coup was very specifically a re-genocide of the indigenous people. The settler population refusing to accept the affront. How dare these Indian peons, right, reassert themselves culturally, politically, economically. And so, that racism very much fueled, the coup, the acquiescence of the army, right, to the new coup leaders. Those are the ongoing effects of this enslavement and dispossession, as the system wants to push back against those of us in the global South reasserting, those of us who are parts of the global South, internal colonies in the global North, who are reasserting ourselves. And the response is a ratcheting up of the coercive apparatus to maintain the system as it is, to maintain the capitalist system, even if it is shifting. And he's not the only one to recognize that. Even as we know, there is this shift to the knowledge industries, to knowledge-based economy. It's still under a capitalist model, right? Who is owning the platforms for the distribution of information? Still privately owned and managed. It is not democratized. And again, the attempts at maintaining net neutrality are to try to keep it as democratic as it can possibly be right now. So, those would be some of the questions I'd have for Dr. Higginbotham in terms of both his theological position on capitalism and the reliance of the knowledge economy on the continuing extractive economy. I think I had one more point or question, but I'm sure it'll come back around. So to answer the question a little more directly, capitalism hasn't served Black people at all, except in maybe individual cases of folks who were able to enrich themselves, always at the expense of other Black people in some kind of way. There's a new film coming out. Maybe it's going to be, or maybe it's a Netflix series on Madam C.J. Walker, celebrating her as the first Black millionaire in the United States. But, you know, she made her riches encouraging Black women to mutilate themselves, right? Hair straighteners and vanishing creams, right? Lightening creams. Those are capitalist values, and deeply embedded in those capitalist values is the devaluing of, you know, Black life, African beingness in the world. And that, again, is one of the great contradictions of the modern world. The devaluing of our humanity through the overvaluing of our bodies as commodities and producers of wealth. Anyway, I think I answered the question.
Okay, absolutely. So it looks like we have a raised hand, actually, Intense Black. I'm going to unmute you so you can go ahead and pose your question, since we are a last small. And we're not in the chat box. So let me try to unmute you. Why is this not happening?
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Oh,
Okay.
Thank you, Jitu. Okay.
He's muted again.
Okay.
Okay, there we go.
I think I'm unmuted.
You are unmuted. We can hear you. Yes.
Okay. All right. Intense Black, also known as G2 Siddiqui. I had a question early on, and I thought there was supposed to be a box where we could type in questions, but I didn't see that, which is why I raised my hand.
I see.
So if I can just proceed, forward. I had a question. Excuse me?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I had a question early on, but it kind of ties into some of the things that Dr. Higginbotham said, and also related to the initial statements and follow-up statements by Professor Doucette and Dean D. We were talking about the issue of capitalism, and my question was, with the globalization of automation, how do you see capitalism, or do you see the decline of capitalism giving rise to global automation, and how does that intersect with this discussion? Also, I noticed that when Dr. Higginbotham talked about the various stages of production, he talked about there's only been 4: agriculture, industrial, and knowledge-based information, excluding the electronic/computer age, and that, I believe, is a significant part of means of productions or another system. And so I wanted to know, how do you see capitalism intersecting with this rise in global automation, where it doesn't rely on feeding on others as capitalism does for its existence. In fact, it's displaced and permanently displaced workers. It's created a system of homelessness where people can't afford to no longer provide for themselves because their jobs they've been permanently displaced from work? And how do you see that fitting into the scheme of everything? Thank you.
Thank you. Dindy, would you like to respond? James, would you like to respond?
That has been spotty, but I'll come back every time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So this is can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the question of automation is actually very interesting to me. In a world that I think that if we didn't have capitalist mode of production or capitalist relations, we should be excited because it means that we could spend more time doing what we want and less time doing menial tasks. Okay. But unfortunately, because the way capitalist mode of production works, the idea is to try and extract value at every point of production possible, which means that of course there's fear associated with the loss of jobs and opportunities. And as a result, it makes people not be excited about, you know, automation or new or new technologies that could actually collectively all benefit us. Some of the models that I've seen that actually utilize workers' cooperatives or more in socialist economies is that they have that. European or Nordic countries have more of a social democracy, and what you'll notice is they're able to cut hours more, they're able to put in more energy into tasks that are far from being replaced, you know, like things like taking care of the elderly or taking care of like work that we actually consider to be feminized or less valued. They're able to put more resource into that and shorten the workday and have more leisure and creative time. And that's just a social democracy, you know, like Germany is still a capitalist society. So I think models that I've seen that have some kind of potential is for us to, it's actually cheaper for us to buy people out of their jobs, of their current jobs that we all know are going to be obsolete. It's a lot better to put our energies into reskilling. I don't love this word. Or if you'll notice that there's still folks in places in the South and in rural parts of this country where you still have mining and fracking and some of these practices that we know are unhealthy and so are towards the end. Like we're not going to be in those industries for very long. And it turns out when at models that I've looked at, it's a lot easier to actually just pay out a miner, pay them their salary, even for a couple of years, than it is to insist on that particular mode of production, one that is declining benefits. So let's not be fooled. Capitalists are not jumping onto these new technologies to serve people or because it's a benevolent, it's because you can trying to kind of address that declining rate of profit. The idea that you can't extract as much as you could in the 17th century when you
We're kind of patchy, Dindy. I'm not sure if something's happening with your connection, but you just started getting kind of distorted. Okay, well, maybe while she's trying to solve that, someone might want to also respond about the question of automation. Pardon. No, I don't think I did that. We're actually on the same screen, Ellie. We're on the former screen. We haven't moved. Thank you.
Sure. And I would respond similarly to Dindy. The problem with automation is not, automation itself, but again, it's in private hands, right? Whose interest is in dispossessing workers. Being a cultural worker, a reader, a viewer, I often reference cultural product, and I mean, it's the problem. The vision of Gene Roddenberry and Star Trek, right? This is the Star Trek universe. Those material problems of humanity have been solved, so people can take that time to develop themselves, right? To study what they want to study, to pursue their interests not as hobbies, but as sort of a full-time, exercise. There's been some time already that the mode of production as it is, or really the mode of overproduction, has already made many workers redundant. So, does the society have the vision to free that time up for working class folks, for peasants and campesinos? Because automation can take care of a lot of the productive activities outside of those areas like service, caregiving, education, etc. It should be an opportunity for people to enrich themselves, but it can't be as long as it is again privately owned, operated, organized, operating under capitalist values, efficiency, profit motive, etc. So, the owners are always trying to find a way to not pay workers, what they deserve. So, automation can be one of those boons to the working class. It can't be that as long as, so in terms of, Brother G, to your question, its relation to capitalism, as long as it is operated under a capitalist model, it's going to be something that dispossesses workers rather than free them from the need to work in those fields.
Okay. If there is anyone else who would like to comment directly about automation, we can. Before maybe doing one more topic, I actually have a question I'd like to pose, and then moving on to a break.
Yeah, this is James. I might have something to say, but my computer has been on and off, and the sound has been on and off. So I didn't catch a lot of what was said.
Okay, if I can attempt to nutshell it, that automation in itself can actually be a boon to the masses of people, but under the current, under capitalist relations, it just becomes another tool of, oppression, marginalization, displacement, as Brother Jitu said, and whatnot. And so dealing with a further commentary on the possibilities, for automation.
Well, in terms of Black people, until Black people own the means of production, I don't see it as being any benefit or of much value. The robots and the industry are still in the hands of the people, and in working class people in general. You robotize, and at the same time, I think somebody already said, should create leisure time, but basically what it does is increase profits, almost like investment capital. People are becoming billionaires investing in certain corporations now who does that benefit? So the wealth gap, income gap, health gap steadily increases. Unemployment gap is while I suppose if Black people and working class people had the ownership, then there might be some benefit, but again, might create stability for the owners, but we ain't the owners.
Okay, reel that. I have a question. I'd like to ask that the question of reparations be put into this context, this discussion of ownership of the means of production, of capitalist relations, of lessening capitalist relations, and automation. Any of these kinds of discussions on how labor is going to produce wealth and how wealth is going to be distributed. How does reparations fit into this discussion? Yusuf, Brooks, would you like to respond first?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so what I would say is the best. Well, when we need to have reparations, we need to have it on our own terms. So what a lot of the bourgeois politicians are talking about right now, I am not in favor of. I'm not in favor of reparations on the terms of the white supremacist government and the system and what the capitalists want to do. What I think is necessary is when we demand reparations, that we divert the majority of resources to the rebuilding and revitalizing of colonized people around the world, and particularly us here in America. And we get paid back for every hour of work that we did for 400 years unpaid. But that gets handled through, democratically handled through like a Black Revolutionary Party that is able to assess the needs of the people and adhere to and be accountable to the people, and to decide where we need to divert those resources that are rightfully ours.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Would anyone else like to chime in on that? Reparations in context.
Sure. Well, that is a question. A crime against humanity has been committed. A world body generally recognized, the United Nations, in Durban, what was that, 2001? Community organizations from all over the world met, discussed it, talked about it, despite political manipulations by the colonizing countries. Both slavery and colonialism were defined as crimes against humanity, and as such, repair is due. That repair, I want to echo Yusuf that a Black Revolutionary Party, right, an African Revolutionary Party or parties, United Front, are going to be necessary, that will be necessary to set the terms, right? Rather than accept the terms that the colonizers and enslavers may want to present, we need to be making demands on them and not, negotiating terms. And that reparations takes lots of different forms that could include and should include all kinds of debt relief. It's odious debt anyway, including student debt from whatever country Africans are in, African descent people. Return of land, turning over of resources, nationalizing of mines, any number of things. And actually, I believe there are 5 areas in particular, starting with cessation. They need to stop doing what they're doing right now. Restitution, compensation, rehabilitation. I mean, there are and ways of understanding that. Satisfaction, that's one of them. So again, that reparations, beyond the idea of just a check coming from a particular government, that reparations takes on many forms. Both enslavement, colonialism, neo-colonialism, they're multifaceted, and so reparations needs to be multifaceted. Also, the capitalist system is not, again, designed to offer reparations, won't offer reparations. The world system as it is won't offer reparations. We are going to eventually have to take them. But we use what institutions are here now to push the question, and when they have reached their limits, we push through and create the new to take our reparations. At the very least, nationalize the damn resources in countries where Black people are in a majority. I mean, we can begin to repair ourselves on the way to making our demands against the imperialist powers.
Okay, thank you, thank you. All right, so why don't we move on to taking a break. We can step away for about a good 15 minutes. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
All
Sounds
right.
good.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's step away, and we're going to put up our image and our music, and see you in 15.
See you in 15.
Okay.
All right.
Right.
Why can't I?
Okay, so see, I'm there. Oh, here, let me mute.
after all this time, I've been trying to tell somebody, please, ain't no way to undo. There just ain't no way to undo. Yeah, but I'm very myself to happen to you. I said, honest to God, honest to God, honest to God. Oh, you go, reminisce.
All righty, so we have returned, and I think that our screen master has returned as well. And we can go on to the next question. This look at political systems. Let me move some things around on my screen. Getting power to the people through democratic processes. Electoral and party politics are the cornerstone of political processes in the majority of modern nations where a democratic norm is sought. Two fundamental models of democratic participation applied. One, representative democracy, two-party dominant systems, for example, proportional and winner-take-all election processes. And two, direct democracy, people's councils, neighborhood councils, for examples, these being the organs of direct democracy. And some of those direct mechanisms, citizens' initiatives, and referendum processes. So while no system is impervious to corruption or distortion or outright disruption by the powerful in a society, some may be more potentially equalizing than others. And so we're looking at, next slide, when it arrives, it will ask the question, how have electoral and party systems served and disserved Africa's children all over the world? And we're ready to switch. Let's see. Not something I can do from where I'm at. Okay. Okay, how do these electoral processes tend to serve, disserve Black people? What's been our most effective use? And studying forms of direct democracy as practiced here in the United States and abroad. Should we take a closer look at that? It's a question on the floor. Yusuf Brooks, would you like to open the discussion?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. So what I like to say is that I think that with the current democratic system we have right now, it speaks to, it's very limiting and it disserves Black people in the United States in particular. because we are subject to the wills of what white voters want and what the bourgeois and who the bourgeoisie selects as the candidates to run for office. We're limited by that. We're limited by the way that the United States government system is structured, which until very recently has been structured to completely exclude us. And now it includes us in very small ways and gives us very limited power to act in our interests. But because of the way it's structured, most people who do exercise the only like form of a political participation, which most people only vote, is their methods are what they leave people with limited choices and to try and pick between who is the worst, who's not gonna make it life harder, considerably harder than the other candidate, as opposed to who do we want, who's gonna represent us, who's gonna have our interests, who's gonna help alleviate some of our struggles, and who's gonna liberate us. And so I think that's what vaguely was what like limits us nationally, and globally we're limited by the power of the very powerful nation states like the United States, like the various Western European powers who can use their capital to enforce their will through international institutions like the IMF, the Holy Trinity, and they set the norms for how global capitalism is going to operate, and they set them in a way that limits the power of underdeveloped countries, like primarily in Africa, and colonized and oppressed nations throughout the world, because they give them odious debt. So they send them like loans that help to that they can't pay back. They're working to underdevelop the economies because of the industries, because Europe subsidizes their food production, which then leaves African industries, whereas African agricultural producers to struggle to compete with the cheap prices that Europe sets theirs on the market for. They end up having to import, like what happens in Haiti, where the U.S. forcibly sends in their aid packages, which turn Haiti from self-sufficient as far as food is concerned to completely dependent on foreign aid, which enriches U.S. aid companies and nonprofits, so-called nonprofits. So I think that, and then that all ties back to how it affects us here too, but it affects us here in multiple ways. And those are just a few examples. I can see there's a lot here that's on the screen that I could focus on, but I wanted to say lastly that a lot of the leaders and the representation in government are not representative of Black people, as representative of Black people as they would like to have themselves seen, because what they represent more is the powers that put them there, which is usually lots of money and industrialists and people who have lobbyists who have big interests in undermining the liberation and freedom of the Black community.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, yes. Is James back? James Dindy back? I don't happen to see them on my screen.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, since I'm talking, I'll just comment briefly in agreement with Yusuf that electoral politics are very limited. And I think I'm of the mindset that people should engage in them only as a tool towards what we're looking for, and that any reforms that we can get, under whatever this liberal democracy, if that's what it is, are very limited, but that there's some that we can press for that are irreversible and that are worth coming together for. So for example, I think there's a lot of climate legislation. When you look at the Green New Deal, I don't think it goes nearly far enough to even address what it is. But my goodness, we vote for it and we push, but I don't think our energies should lie primarily with electoral system It's a 4-year kind of cycle that can take up a lot of energy. And it's also one that has, you know, every so often requires politicians, goodwill or not, to pander to people at the lowest of all, you know, at the lowest of low levels. You know, here's my vote. Maybe I will fight for 25 cents more for your community, or whatever. The goals are always so small that that we become objects of being pandered to, and there's something kind of odious to me about that. And I think also the politics of representation are very limited in a capitalist system. You know, of course there is something to electing your local community leaders as democratically as you can to get what you're trying to get. But, you know, how well does Maxine Waters address my concerns? She happens to be my rep. There's the hierarchy and the level of steps between, you know, my immediate need and what she has to do is so far removed that I think these national politics really have issues. With that being said, I've seen really strong neighborhood councils and like school board and things where people have pushed. There's universal basic income in Stockton right now, California. You know, small city, they're able to do something. They managed to get a self-described socialist in Seattle. So I think if that's what we have to do to put our energies in the local domain.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yusuf Doucet.
Yes, I'm going to reiterate a lot of what's been said. The you know, the political system as it's constructed, this, you know, representative democracy isn't really very representative. We want to take and use any and all democratic space available to us. And again, I've mentioned before, you know, pushing the limits of the system, right? So that's why we take that democratic space to use it for what it's worth, and also to demonstrate its limits, because we aren't going to ultimately vote ourselves, you know, out of this situation. Though we are encouraged to see, you know, the election, electoral politics as really the pinnacle of democratic participation, and that really does a disservice, I think, to the people, to Black people, to people everywhere. It really is those smaller, more localized areas where we can have the most democratic effect. Our local unions, the neighborhood councils, et cetera, right? You know, the democratic discussions like this. I mean, that's where you can have the most immediate effect. And I am very much in favor of taking use of the democratic space, especially at the local level. I think one of the things mentioned in the frame was the you know, the use of referendums, for example, to you know, as a more genuine form of the will of the people in a, you know, a mass society. The you know, the problem of electoral politics at the you know, the state level, the provincial level, the, you know, the national levels, yeah, we run into the problem of corporate funding, or, you know, what it costs to run for office. The example of Seattle was given. I think it's a great example, and I think one of the reasons the socialist member, I can't remember her name, one of the reasons she was able to win is because there is a system of matching funding. So she was able to, the city matched anything that her wealthy opponent could you know, spend on the race. And so that has a leveling effect. So certainly, those kinds of reforms are possible. And again, at the local level is where we're most likely to see them. If we can begin to get the popular idea of democratic participation beyond the limits of elections and cycles of elections, national, state, local elections, and to see that is going to the neighborhood council meetings, the PTA meetings, et cetera, to make democratic participation something more than a platitude that citizens of the United States like to spout. It matters. I think it matters that the United States has one of the lowest levels of civic participation, as it wants to promote itself as the leader of the free world and the model democracy for the world. The citizens and residents of the United States are barely involved in civic activity, and certainly that is also by plan. I mean, people have to work 2 and 3 jobs, and you perhaps you remember George W. Bush during his second election campaign, commenting on somebody at one of his rallies, this person works 2 or 3 jobs for the love of work. And I mean, how ridiculous is that? Because people have to work, 2 and 3 jobs. So there isn't as much time to be necessarily. But then that's where you look at democracy in the workplace then, right? And again, the forming of unions are a bad word in the, American body politic, but it needs to be rehabilitated. At this level. Then you look at a country like Cuba, who consistently gets high marks when world bodies investigate these things, as one of the most civically engaged societies in the world. One of the reasons for that is the level of political engagement at the local, the neighborhood level. The use of people's councils, et cetera, right? So what works, I think what's most available to us, and where we see, though it doesn't get reported very well in the United States, grassroots, on the ground people's movements throughout Africa, throughout the Latin American countries and the Caribbean, in pockets here in the United States. Where it has worked, maybe at the most local level. I think most recently we have the example of Cooperation Jackson and the movement in Jackson to try to get a progressive government and a progressive economy in place. That became complicated, even more complicated, when I believe Antar Lumumba decided to accept support from the Democratic Party. And so then the Democratic Party began making the kinds of demands that they began to make, where they're interested in the interest of the Democratic Party and not the citizens of Jackson. And so the mayor ran into those limitations because of the relationship that he formed. So we should, look askance at traditional party politics, be we in South Africa, and what the ANC has morphed into, and it wasn't that much of a morph. The problem of party politics throughout the continent, throughout the Caribbean, often where you have armed wings of the parties, ready for manipulation by the imperialist powers. And even the problem of modeling themselves after the imperialist parties, the capitalist parties of the global north.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I hope that answered the question directly enough.
I'm sure. Absolutely. James, you want to chime in?
Yeah, and I'm going to try to keep it short. Just some observations. We're in a democracy has not been really has not taken a firm foothold in the United States through most of its history, and up until about 1965. Even though there was the 15th Amendment, even though there had been some strides towards democracy by Black people, and especially after the 19th Amendment, allowing women to vote, we basically have been and are in a situation of a dictatorship of the majority. So whoever's in the majority, and that has been not Black people throughout our history here, the decisions are made that conform with the interest of the majority. And right now we're in the most ridiculous situation where you have 60,000 people who are in prison for selling weed, and they're pondering releasing them.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you have an order by the governor describing weed shops, so-called legal weed shops, as an essential service. So again, this is the medical marijuana law and the decriminalization of marijuana, legalized marijuana for personal use, was brought about by direct democracy. But once again, it did not benefit the masses of our people. And even those, there were lots of especially Black people who were engaged in the weed underground, and who a lot of whom are part of that 60,000 people. And they advocated against the law. They said it's going to take our business away. And sure enough, when they started handing out licenses, the licenses are not going to those who were servicing the community before, and what's described as an essential service at this point. Those people got locked up and didn't have the $1 million to get a license under this new scheme of distributing marijuana to the masses. So I don't know if I could think of a more blatant example where even the victims of American so-called law enforcement and jurisprudence has people locked up, while what they did is now being described as a what did I just say? What kind of service? An essential service. Very, very bizarre.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you there. Any questions from participants? There's a few more folk with us. You have anything that you see that you'd like to have addressed, or anything that you would like to comment on? If you do the raise hand icon, I can see you if the chat box isn't working.
System that set up electric
Greetings, this is Alake. I wanted to chime in on the grassroots, the need for grassroots participation in this so-called democracy. I've seen how I believe that, as someone mentioned before, that the neighborhood councils, the block clubs, it's on that level that people have to be engaged. And with that engagement has to be education, because many people just vote. If Maxine Waters say vote, they vote. Or if Kamala Harris say vote, they vote. But there's no thought into what they're voting for, or the impact of whatever's on, being discussed at that election. So I believe with our social media and the use of text and all these different tools, that we do have an opportunity to educate more people and to involve more people in the process as a democratic process, and understanding what they're actually saying yes or no to.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Let me find my icon here. Yes, thank you, Alake. And just like kind of something I've been contemplating in this new online, the intensity of the online world, and as I've heard it put today, rather than social distancing, a distance of social engagement. Someone flipped that to speak to how folk are going to be even more intensely involved with their online activity. I'm interested to see how the decline in some of the entertainment industry boosts and reboot a conversation practice. How many more conversations of this kind, a parlor conversation, how often that'll be reproduced as folks aren't, going to movies, aren't going to games, aren't going to, of course, we know they're going to be streaming films directly, new features directly, and they're compensating in that way. And I know Netflix is going to be up and off the off the charts. But I think there's also going to be a lot more concentrated just discussion of this kind as people just get online in their video conferences to, chat with their folks. And hopefully that'll add to the scrutiny of, what we're looking at now, what we're undergoing, and, how these systems are effective and ineffective. All right, we can move past if there's nothing more that anybody wants to develop here. Looking at cultural systems, cultural identity and empowerment. I'm sorry?
Yeah, I did want to back up a second.
Last screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, just, that last cloud over there, how will the pandemic affect electoral systems? I just didn't want to leave that unremarked, that, again, as limited as they are right now, elections are the primary vehicle. And so we should at least be paying attention to, what happens with delayed and postponed elections, and what impact this is going to have on those running for office. For any, I read an article that this morning that says that Trump's approval ratings are down to 44%. I was actually surprised they were that high. But it is having an effect on his electability. Just what you, in some ways, what you just mentioned, Tasha, people are now questioning again whether on the Democratic side, if Biden is the right choice, since the current situation seems to be highlighting the Sanders message, and particularly in terms of a Medicare for all type system. So anyway, just the pandemic is going to have an effect on the election going forward. Legislative struggles over social supports, right? Where again, the capitalist United States is trying any way it can not to open up the national treasury for anything other than military spending, without question. Whereas Canada, I think just today, everyone in Canada, and I don't know if this is every Canadian citizen, every resident of Canada is going to be getting $950 every 2 weeks. Mortgages are on a moratorium for 6 months, and school debt not canceled but deferred indefinitely, as a way to respond to people not being able to go to work, right, to earn, to be able to pay this, without much legislative struggle, right? Just a recognition of what the population at this point needs. Where here, the capitalist values rule, even as the politicians are, on the one hand, figuring out how they're going to stay in office or get elected, and at the same time trying to give with one hand and take back with the other still. That's all. I just didn't want to leave that unremarked.
Thank you.
I also wanted to comment on that because that was on my mind earlier this week when I heard that there was talk of a possible stimulus packet where everyone will be getting $1,000 and something tied to, if you complete the census, that you would be eligible for this money. And I think it was Trump who said that he wanted to do this. And as you say, with his approval rating down, this may be an effort, him offering that as an effort to boost his approval rating. And there will be people who will look at him as a good old boy because he's offering us $1,000. But for me, I think all of this is just tied into, using this situation politically to boost himself. And there will be many people who are not educated or who won't look at all the things he's done over the last years and will say, well, he did help me in my time of need. There are people who will respond like that.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, I know right now this system is so broken. They've closed everything, and people who need essential health care can't even get Medi-Cal, can't reach anybody to get a Medi-Cal card, to be able to get medications. So our contrast to what happens in Canada is very blatant.
Yeah, I had a conversation the other evening where the notion of the $1,000, offering came up. And yeah, the person's response was, well, at least they're doing better. At least they're getting on it, and that's a positive thing, and what have you. Folks ready to turn away from glaring abuse, even against this whole issue of voting against one's self-interest, of acting, thinking, and behaving against one's self-interest. Rather than the conversation about what this $1,000 was supposed to do for anybody, what $1,000 a month was supposed to do, kind of didn't come up. With the conversation that wanted to be had was, something's being offered and you're getting on top of it, and this is a positive piece, which makes me think about this civic discourse item, how often, just kind of like on an interpersonal level, these conversations that are kind of difficult to broach because you feel if you introduce the next question, well, what is this $1,000? What is that, spitting into the fire actually mean? Then you run the risk of, being felt and experienced as abrasive or, too political, or just kind of this real depression of any kind of civic discourse, just, people talking to each other about what's going on with their politicians, with their economy, with this, and it's become conventionally so impolite and considered so abrasive. It's an interesting piece to figure out how to push through. One would think it would be obvious that $1,000 is not something that's problem solving.
No, it won't on any level. It reminds me of when Obama bailed out all those banks. Instead of bailing out the people who were actually struggling to pay their mortgages and losing their homes.
Right.
He bailed out the people who were taking the homes from the people.
Mm-hmm.
So
He
to me,
helping the predator
$1,000,
instead of the victim. Mm-hmm.
right? And that's what seems to be headed in this next set of what they call the stimulus packet. I know Karen Bass mentioned in her town hall meeting or letter that she sent after that the stimulus packet has to be looked at very carefully. And I think this is where people do need to say $1,000 is not going to really put a dent on what people are going through during this time.
Absolutely. And, and at any other time for all the folk who are, doing $1,000 a month, $1,700 a month, $2,000 a month,
I have a question.
Yes.
To anyone who can answer it about this $1,000. Are they and they're proposing a one-time $1,000 relief payment?
I have not. Well, just to say, when I heard it, the first I heard it discussed when it was announced in one of his press briefings. One of the reporters did ask how often this, well, it's certainly not going to be one time, it'll be many times. So indirect answer. I don't know.
Indirect answer. Yeah,
indirect. So
I heard something about the Republican plan for the payment would end up being they so far they have 2 times listed, but they said that it may occur more. So they said that they would send a first check of up to $1,200 to people who are making less than $75,000. But if you're the lower end of that, and you pay almost no taxes, but you make over $2,500 a month, not a month, a year, then you would end up getting $600, only $600. So the more money you make, the more money you get until like you reach upper middle class, and then it stops there. So it's actually like regressive. It seems nice, but it
said the more money you make, the more money you get.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
is it is it the perception that it's a percentage of income? Is it that sort of thing that you're making some kind of?
It's like a regressive.
Okay.
Tax. It's based on, it reaches a certain point, and I think they just like have levels, and once you hit that threshold, you get a certain amount. So I would $600 because I'm a part-time worker and part-time student, and so it didn't really help me at all.
Right. Right. And I think people know this on a practical lived experience level. I wonder what, folk are having to say about it, beside, oh, well, they're offering something, they're doing something, something's coming. What's coming? Anyway, any more in this area?
I have one more issue that came up with the coronavirus. The Trump administration, under the Trump administration, the Department of Justice is taking advantage of the emergency crisis, and they seem to be asking to suppress certain constitutional rights, to waive certain constitutional rights so that they can arrest people for an indefinite amount of time, to arrest people without having access to a judge. So they would suspend habeas corpus and a bunch of different constitutional, well, around in the same area, but a bunch of different constitutional amendments will be limited under these requests that they made to the courts. To Congress. But so far, like, it's not seeming like that's going to happen, but that's what the administration wants to do. It doesn't seem like it has anything to do with helping the virus, just to increase their own power.
Can you tell me your source for that?
Sure, let me pull it up right now.
And I guess while we wait, well, what I'll add about that, what's a little odious about it is it might come down to things like there's this suggestion to have the folks on Santee Alley to stop doing their current work for creating masks for the nation. So it's this interesting like ramp up towards like a 1945 world, like we're in war conditions. Therefore, your personal time and possessions can be confiscated for the purpose of addressing this crisis. And that might mean like having folks in prison produce more things. There are all sorts of things that have been floated out there so far.
Well, while we're waiting for Youssef, oh no, go ahead, Youssef.
Okay, well, so the first, I read it from Rolling Stone, but the Rolling Stone cites Politico as for where for the reporter who was covering the case.
Yeah, and Harvard Law Today has an article.
Yeah, so it just came out like today, I think. So it's relatively new. Or yesterday? I'm not sure.
Okay, so I have a question about that. These are further curtailing of constitutional rights in addition to what the Patriot Act has already done? And isn't the Patriot Act still in effect? I'm not sure about that.
The Patriot Act is still in effect.
There? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, it is still in effect. And so this is, which already curtails several constitutional rights.
Habeas corpus and these kinds of things.
Yes. So it's just more of that, right? Doubling down on curtailing rights with now the threat of pandemic, or at least as the rationale. Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna research that further and see. Now you said Rolling Stone and Politico.
Yep. It was a reporter from Politico who the Rolling Stone cited. So I would probably go to Politico since they were the ones covering it at first.
Yeah. See, I don't see anything. I'll look for it. It's worthy of investigating further and try to get a source document.
Okay.
Jake, do you have any comment about where the Patriot Act and any subsequent legislation kind of leaves us in terms of, constitutional protections of certain kinds?
The Patriot Act is still in effect, especially when you bank or try to send money or try to accept money. But there have been a lot of laws put in place since then and a lot of determinations by the Supreme Court, which really curtail civil liberties, on just a regular basis, and chipping away at the Fourth Amendment and chipping away at the issues of fair trials and how police respond in general, how the so-called justice system responds in general. But I think this thing, just like 9/11, will open up a whole nother can of worms. And this president, who fashions himself a dictator anyway, I can do anything I want, will take whatever advantage he can. It was pretty predictable. He was going to have, he had these tendencies because he ran a small business. I mean, lots of money, but he ran a small business, and was used to managing stuff in his own, used to dictating without a board bringing him back to center or more reasonable position. He was the boss. Whatever he said went, and he just carried that over. And it was just like the instability of his institutions shows that his institutions, his so-called administration, fighting with anyone who has a differing opinion or a criticism of his policies. So should somebody come up with some like, what's his name, the little creature who has set his immigration policy, I forget his name, but should anybody come up with some way to increase his power, he's gonna do it.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Any other comments or questions in this area? Before we switch that screen.
I was just researching. It said that parts of the Patriot Act had expired in 2015, but then was reenacted with the Freedom Act, and that was supposed to sunset in 2019. But you said that didn't happen, James?
No, I'm saying that especially the financial institution portions of the Patriot Act are still in effect, and that those the most odious parts of the Patriot Act that expired have been replaced
with similar provisions.
With similar provisions and with Supreme Court decisions that allow police to snoop and spy and detain and lie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right, let's go on to our look at culture.
Okay, let me just a question.
Yes.
It's 6:57.
Yes.
And how much long, or 6:59 by my other phone. And how much longer do you think we'll go?
Well, that is a question. We are formally at that hour. Thank you, James, because I'm looking at the screen and not looking at the time. We certainly have, exhausted some conversations, so we can wrap it and pick up, or we can talk about cultural systems. What say ye, all who are here and participating?
I'd like to say something. I've had my hand up for quite a while, but I guess no one has been screen.
Yeah, I didn't see it. Go ahead.
Okay. It's just a question in general, because we're in a really evolving state right now. We don't know from day to day what life is going to be like. I was hoping that prior to the close of this gathering, that we have some conversation with things moving forward in terms of since Joker won't be back together for at least a few weeks. Some of the things that we can anticipate possibly happening in conversation related to that. Excuse me. That was my question.
Okay. Are you saying, speaking to specifically in terms of anticipating more encroachment on constitutional rights, or you just mean in general?
Just in general, we each one of these screens or the panels have made reference to COVID-19.
Yes.
But because we're actually in the throes of what's happening daily, that there be some conversation that will help us to segue into whatever develops during in between now and the next Joker Collective meeting.
Mm-hmm. Why don't you go ahead and start that?
Well,
What is it looking at? Mm-hmm.
I think that your question in terms of whether we move in the cultural system, I don't want to deviate from what this particular program is about today, but I just hope that we have some discussion related to anticipated developments. So I don't know, James had raised a question about the time. I just think it's too critical for us to leave here to close out and not have some discussion on that level.
Well, I can myself agree with that. I would ask what others would like to do. Do we want to add another 15 minutes to have specifically that discussion and leave the cultural systems discussion for our next gathering? Or how do we want to proceed? Can we?
Well, I'm still a little unclear on the question. Is it, what steps do we take in the next few weeks? Is that the question, or what kinds of things we should be anticipating?
Kind of all of that. Like I said, things are rapidly developing.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know where we'll be as a community tomorrow or a week from now or 2 weeks from now. So to leave this particular program without having any type of discussion about it kind of just leaves it open. We've had various groups, like James and I have been meeting with some BALA people, Black Hawks Los Angeles, and others in terms of several issues. We primarily focus on 4 issues: personal safety, communication, food and water, and shelter. And I know that there are other groups that are meeting and having discussions related to what's happening with COVID-19 and our communities. And I think that that's something, a conversation that as participants in Joker Collective, that we have at least some discussion about that prior to closing out this gathering. So it's kind of open, but related to what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, certainly. Well, let me let you say that we have been discussing just doing a forum off schedule dedicated to, COVID-19 as such, and surrounded issues, just so it's not lost on, our process and not lost on our thinking. But did that clarify for you? Yusuf, what the goal is? Can't hear you.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I would definitely, want to propose again, this is an opportunity, this video conferencing thing that we're, pushed into. There's more opportunities to hop online and have other kinds of discussions. I also know, let me say this, that Jabari is interested in coordinating just such a discussion, with folk who are directly connected with the FIBA and, bringing folk into that. I know that's upcoming. And that being said, what would we like to do relative to what Jitu is raising?
Well, I would not want to have a truncated discussion on cultural systems, and so I'm perfectly fine with holding that over so that we can give it its proper due, because it deserves it. And so if we want to spend 15 minutes responding to G2's question, I'm all on board.
I agree.
Me as well.
I'm fine.
Okay. Okay. Then, all right, Jitu, do you want to start that ball rolling? Some of the top things, we just brainstorm that, just start, tossing it around.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're in a really unstable and uncharted area in terms of things that are developing. I know there's a lot of theories out there as a result of what's happening, and people feeling like this or that is responsible for COVID, whether it's a government conspiracy, whatever. The reality is that people are dying. And one of the things that we're concerned about, or that we've discussed, is ensuring that those, and not necessarily just those, but those that are part of the circle that we travel in, that they're safe, on a lot of different levels. So we've had some conversations via Zoom, and we've had James and I've had one-on-one conversations, and in terms of shelter, in terms of making sure people are safe. So I don't have any specific area that I wanted to discuss. I just feel like we need to have part of the discussion as those of us that participate in JOCO collective events and activities. Like I say, there were 4 basic areas that we were looking at: personal safety, communication being a big one, because we don't know where things are going. We don't know if cell towers will be shut down to monitor or to curtail communication. And so that means that cell phones would be out in a lot of locations. Being able to reach, loved ones and associates and so forth to make sure people are okay. So we looked at communication. We looked at, of course, food and water, whether those things will no longer be available. In stores, as most of us know, the store shelves are rapidly depleting, so you can't really depend on that. Or we may, I don't know. I'm just saying right now things are rapidly developing. There was a conversation, I don't know how true it is, but there was a comment that was made on one of the threads that we on about a thread where it was indicated that the Homeland Security or the government trucks were on live and interceptors.
There's some feedback. Jitu, you have some feedback. Yeah. Or an echo.
I don't know, so maybe gotten, I don't know if it's coming from me because I haven't changed anything. But I heard that there was at the 405 freeway and 10 freeway intersection, that there were Army trucks. So I don't know if they intend to implement some type of curfew that will limit or minimize people's travel. I don't know. Those are things going on right now.
Okay. Anybody have any direct responses? And then actually, Jitu, I'd like you to explain a little bit more about the personal safety question. In fact, can we do that before we jump in? What are we meaning by personal safety?
Well, one of the things that has been, or that usually happens in a really chaotic situation, is that you have food in your house and somebody doesn't, they want to break into your house to get your food. Just a variety of things, personal safety, how do we ensure people's personal safety is through checking in, or when they're out, being cognizant of your surroundings and ensuring that, because of all the chaos that's going on right now, that you're not become a victim. So anything related to personal safety or being, like I say, aware of your surroundings.
Okay.
Those are some of the things that was discussed when we discussed the topic of personal safety.
Yeah, there's a story in the LA Times that Gavin Newsom has activated the National Guard.
Yes.
And for food bank distribution. Now, I don't know what that means and whether it's limited to that, but I think that, just the specter of trucks and tanks rolling around is not anything new to Los Angeles. Those of us who were here in '65, those who were here in '92, it's not a unique sight. So.
Okay.
I think G2, you've already mentioned one of the practices that we need to make sure we're engaging in, and that's checking in with people often to see how they're doing, particularly elders who might be living in isolation. I think we can but what we can anticipate is the number of infected people to go up, or at least identified infections to increase, and the governor has already said that they expect that. They're expecting, what did he say, 56% of the population to be positive within a year. So that, that's what we can expect. And again, it highlights the vulnerable position that we're in, Black people in general, and particularly, working class and barely working class Black folks who can't go out and, buy groceries for, let alone a month, can't buy groceries for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. So, I expect that we can anticipate rising anxieties, tensions, et cetera. And I heard the governor in his address the other day talk about the National Guard and try to reassure people that they were there just, for what you mentioned, James, right, to help staff the food banks and other kinds of support services. But, nonetheless, they're at the ready, right, for whenever the state decides that that mission needs to be extended to a, to a policing. Mm-hmm. role, so that, we need to keep having these conversations, trying to anticipate, what areas of need and how we can work collectively to alleviate those issues, protect ourselves, and how we can do that when we are being, with an order to stay at home right now, right? So, are you going to have to, how do you prove to the officers on the street, if that's the case, that, you're on a mission of mercy to make sure your auntie, has groceries for the week, or, you're going to pick up her medication. I was just talking to one of my son's friends from high school who was over today. It might still be downstairs. She's a security guard, and she had mentioned how they gave her, she was given a special badge or something to flash. Should she be stopped on her way to work, that says, right, she's an essential person who needs to go to work. Who gets those, right? Who's going to be distributing those sorts of things? We'll see. I went to my office the other day to pick up as much stuff as I thought I might need at home. And I know I couldn't get it all, right? So am I going to be able to get back in a few weeks? So we'll see. And we need to start, planning for that, continuing to have those conversations. How are we prepared, and how can we prepare? What can we anticipate as the number of cases in California, in the nation at large, go up, in the states where we have family members, friends and comrades? How are we going to continue, and can we, how long can we rely on whatever corporation owns Zoom to be able to have these types of conversations? So, I guess at this point we are in the talking about it phase, and trying to see what our capabilities are with these new limitations that we should expect to become more stringent in the coming days and weeks. As you said, it's a day-to-day thing. Yeah, I think at the very least, that's what we can anticipate.
And I was just going to say very briefly, last week in Culver City, there's a gun store, and I drove past it, and there was a line around the block of the gun store, which, really very white liberal neighborhood. I was, so it was really interesting to me that people are stockpiling, and the bank had a similar situation where people are very nervous and panicky. And, we're only in the first couple of weeks, but we're at the beginning of this particular crisis. I have a cousin in Italy who's a doctor, and they're very worn out. They're very worn out by the whole, and they have a more robust and put together healthcare system there. It has its challenges, but they started out with more. And it's really going to be interesting. I know the question I have for myself is how quickly people will be willing to give up their own rights to be saved by an entity because of fear, and how can we think soberly as we do that, because that was 9/11, very little questioning because we had an outside enemy. But I think also the conversation of like strong community and collectives where we're organizing around basic needs, but also things like, I'm in education, schools are not coming back. That's clear, not coming back until the fall. So while we take care of our basic needs, can we build structures where we're still educating young people, like helping the K-12 system, if, those of us who have skills in those areas, encouraging, like I have graduate students now who don't know if they can graduate. The limbo is really not helpful. And so it seems to me that in our Black communities, whatever we do, we have to keep meeting in this way and having conversation so that we're not, taken over by some of these draconian things that are like I think are inevitable. I think we're going to see more repression, not less, for a while.
Repression.
Mm-hmm. Anyone?
Yeah, I also think it's important to note that in other places like Italy and in Wuhan, there are much harsher measures. And in Wuhan, they were able to slow and actually stop the community transmission of the virus. And if apparently there are plans from a source that could very soon shut down this this relatively loose stay-at-home order into a complete shutdown, where people cannot leave the house at all. You know, like in Italy and some other places.
Yeah.
That people should take heed to that. And, you know, I know it's been difficult. Some people have been preparing for weeks. Other people haven't prepared for much at all. I know they were shutting the electricity down in Arcadia for whatever reason. Arcadia and Monrovia, Edison. So people have been stocking up on meat, put it in their freezer, but you know, whatever shutdown is going to be, there's no guarantee that people will have refrigeration. So again, taking very practical steps in terms of how you're going to survive, or how we're going to survive over weeks' time of not leaving the house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the questions that have been on my mind is about the children. Since they've been sent home, a lot of children, now I know some of the schools are using Zoom and remote learning because their children have the iPads, but you know, there are a number of schools in Los Angeles who do not have those iPads. And a number of those children were sent home with no packets or anything to continue their process. And so that's you know, a major concern for me, that these children are going to lose a whole semester of any type of instructional learning. And many of these children who depended on the school as their quote unquote babysitter, if their parents are essential people going to work, you know, that's a big gap now also. Who's supervising and monitoring those children? I know I just had one of my workers at my facility, she called off because she has no one to do childcare. She can't find anyone to watch her child. And she said, but I don't know how I'm gonna pay my rent. Well, I have to replace her, so I can't keep her on payroll. You know, it's really a bad situation. So for me, the other thing is the communication. How do we continue to communicate? Because I know that there's already been, I've tried to use the phone and they said, you're unable to get your call through right now. So it's like circuit overload, or are they actually just stopping us from, you know, like you say, shutting down cell phone towers in different areas randomly?
A question that I would have about some of these key questions are being raised is, how do we know? How can we monitor? How can we be informed? For instance, how soon a total shutdown might occur, James? How would we, you know, monitor that? The cell tower question, what is the way to monitor that directly, etc.?
We pay attention to the news, pay attention to government announcements, pay attention to company announcements, and keep an eye out. I don't know if y'all heard me, but you know, in Arcadia and Monrovia, they're shutting down power, or they had planned to shut down power till the residents got upset. You know, because they have their freezers and refrigerators packed with meat, which is going to spoil if the power's left off too long. just making sure to paying attention, and that's the other thing. And in terms of this Black August group is, sharing information, making sure, if one of us knows, then all of us should know, and make sure the channels of communication are open to make sure that we do pass on information. And I don't know, but like I said, there was a source in the LAPD that said that they're going to possibly come down much harsher, like in Wuhan and like in Italy, where you can't even leave your house. Relatively harsh compared to what's happening now.
Okay. Okay. So we're currently at 7:24. My assumption is that we want to start wrapping up the conversation. As I said, I know that there are some specific plans to have a broader, planning kind of conversation of this kind in the works. So I think that we can look forward to that happening within this next week. And I'll definitely send communications out, when that gets established.
Ask a question, please.
Yes, thank you.
This thing that Jabari is setting up, is that something that will be physically at the FIBA Center, or?
No. Oh,
You're garbled.
Something happened.
Okay, is my voice clear?
Yes, now.
Due to what I was saying was, what's been discussed has been a video conference. It's actually not at the FIBA Center.
Okay.
Be a video conference situation. Okay, do we have anything more to put into this particular look before we wrap up? No? Okay.
I don't think so. Well,
We back?
Oh, was that, sorry.
that was Harakuti.
That was Harakuti?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're about to wrap up. I thought I saw it.
Maybe that was background.
Okay.
I was going to ask, although I don't know that this is a question for this forum, because really it's a JOCO business meeting, but typically at the end of a JOCO we confirm that we'll be back at it. So I assume that's the case, and we will be back on our regular schedule, which means the conversation picks up on the second Saturday of April 11th.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
Online.
we're back at JOCO on April 11th, where we can pick up with the discussion, get back to cultural systems, and also see where we are in relation to the pandemic and state response and our response.
Absolutely. Okay, so thank you, everybody.
Thank you, and thank everyone.
Yes, been an excellent discussion, and we'll sally forth. Recorded, so I'll get this recording to folk, and Ashe.
Ashe. Be
Ashe.
well, everyone.
Be
Good
well.
night.
Educate, and organize.
Educate and organize.
Ashe.
Ashe.